Many years ago, a young man named Giovanni Guascanti left his home in Naples to study in northern Italy. He rented a small room on the top floor of a dark and ancient palace. Long ago, the building had belonged to a noble family. Signora Lisabetta, an elderly woman, now rents its rooms to students at the University of Padua. Giovanni's room had a small window. From it, he could see a large garden that had many plants and flowers. "Thus the garden belonged to you?" he asked Signora Lisabetta one day. "Oh no," she said quickly. "That garden belongs to the famous doctor Giacomo Rappaccini. People claim that he utilizes these plants to create unique forms of medicine. He resides in a small brown house surrounded by a garden with his daughter Beatrice. Giovanni often sat by his window to look at the garden. He had never seen so many different kinds of plants. They all boasted enormous green leaves and magnificent flowers in every hue of the rainbow. Giovanni's favorite plant was in a white marble vase near the house. Large purple flowers blanketed the area. One day, while Giovanni was looking out his window, he saw an old man in a black cape walking in the garden. The old man was tall and thin. His face was an unhealthy yellow color. His black eyes were very cold. The old man wore thick gloves on his hands and a mask over his mouth and nose. He walked carefully among the plants, as if he were walking among wild animals or poisonous snakes. Although he looked at the flowers very closely, he did not touch or smell any of them. When the old man arrived at the plant with the big purple flowers, he stopped. He removed his mask and yelled loudly, "Beatrice, come help me." "I am coming, Father. What do you want?" Answered the warm young voice from inside the house. The young woman came into the garden. Her thick, dark hair fell around her shoulders in curls. Her cheeks were pink, and her eyes were large and black. She seemed full of life, health, and energy as she walked among the plants. Giovanni thought she was as beautiful as the purple flowers in the marble vase. The old man spoke to her. She nodded her head as she touched and smelled the flowers that her father had been so careful to avoid. Several weeks later, Giovanni went to visit Pietro Vaglione, a friend of his. Professor Vaglione taught medicine at the university. During the visit, Giovanni inquired about Dr. Rappaccini's background. "He is a brilliant scientist," Professor Vaglione replied, "but he is also a dangerous man." "Why?" asked Giovanni. The older man shook his head slowly. "Rappaccini prioritizes science over human welfare. Rappaccini has created numerous deadly poisons from the plants in his garden. He thinks he can cure sickness with these poisons. It is true that he has successfully cured a very sick person who was expected to die. But Rapacina's medicine has also killed many people. I think he would sacrifice any life, even his own, for one of his experiments. But what about his daughter? Giovanni said, I'm sure he loves her. The old professor smiled at the young man. He said, You've probably heard about Beatrice Rapacini. People say she is very beautiful, but few men in Padua have ever seen her. She never leaves her father's garden. Giovanni left Professor Vaglione's house as the sun was setting. On his way home, he stopped at a flower shop where he bought some fresh flowers. They returned to his room and sat by the window. The garden was quiet, with very little sunlight remaining. The purple flowers on Giovanni's favorite plant seemed to glow in the evening's fading light. Then someone came out of the doorway of the little brown house. It was Beatrice. She entered the garden and walked among the plants. She bent to touch the leaves of a plant or to smell a flower. Rapacina's daughter seemed to grow more beautiful with each step. When she reached the purple plant, she buried her face in its flowers. Giovanni heard her say, Give me your breath, my sister. The ordinary air makes me weak. Give me one of your beautiful flowers. Beatrice gently broke off one of the largest flowers. As she lifted it, she put it in her dark hair. A few drops of liquid from the flower fell to the ground. One of the drops landed on the head of a tiny lizard, calling near Beatrice's feet. For a moment, the small animal twisted violently. Then it moved no more. Beatrice did not seem surprised. She sighed and placed the flower in her hair. Giovanni leaned out of the window so he'd see her better. At this moment, a beautiful butterfly flew over the garden wall. Beatrice appeared to attract it as it circled her head once. Then the insect's bright wings stopped, and it fell to the ground dead. Beatrice shook her head sadly. Abruptly, her gaze shifted to Giovanni's window. She saw the young man looking at her. Giovanni picked up the flowers he had bought and threw them down to her. He said to the young lady, Were these flowers a gift from Giovanni Gascote? Thank you, Beatrice answered. She picked up the flowers from the ground and quickly ran to the house. She stopped at the door for a moment to wave shyly at Giovanni. It seemed to him that his flowers were beginning to turn brown in her hands. For many days, the young man stayed away from the window that looked out in Rappaccini's garden. He wished he hadn't spoken to Beatrice, as he now felt overwhelmed by her allure. He was a little afraid of her, too. He could not forget the fate of the little lizard and the butterfly. One day, while he was returning home from his classes, he met Professor Balian on the street. "Well, Giovanni," the old man said, "have you forgotten me?" Then he looked closely at the young man. "What is wrong, my friend? Your appearance has changed since the last time we met." It was true. Giovanni had become very thin. His face was white, and his eyes seemed to burn with fever. A man in a long black cape came down the street as they were talking. He moved slowly, as if he was in poor health. His face was yellow, but his eyes were sharp and black. Giovanni recognized the men he had seen in the garden. As he passed them, the old man nodded coldly to Professor Balian, but he looked at Giovanni with a tremendous deal of interest. "It's Dr. Robert Genie," Professor Balian whispered after the old man had passed them. "Has he ever seen your face before?" Giovanni shook his head. "No," he answered, "I don't think so." Professor Balian looked worried. "I think he has seen you before. I know that cold look of his. He looks the same way when he examines an animal he has killed in one of his experiments. Giovanni, I am willing to stake my life on it. You are the subject of one of Rappaccini's experiments." Giovanni stepped away from the old man. "You are joking," he said. "No, I am serious." The professor took Giovanni's arm. "Be careful, my young friend. You are in severe danger." Giovanni pulled his arm away. "I must be going," he said. "Good night." Mr. Giovanni hurried to his room. He felt confused and a little frightened. Signora Lisa Greta was waiting for him outside his door. She knew he was interested in Beatrice. "I have excellent news for you," she said. "I know where there is a secret entrance into Rappaccini's garden." Giovanni could not believe his ears. "Where is it?" he asked. "Show me the way." He went in. The plants all seemed wild and unnatural. Giovanni realized that Rappaccini must have created these strange and terrible flowers through his experiments. Suddenly, Rappaccini's daughter came into the garden. She moved quickly among the flowers until she reached him. Giovanni apologized for coming into the garden without an invitation, but Beatrice smiled at him and made him feel welcome. "I see your love flowers," she said. "You've come to examine my father's rare collection more closely," she said. While she was speaking, Giovanni noticed a distinct perfume in the air surrounding her. He wasn't sure if this wonderful smell came from the flowers, from her breath. She asked him about his home and his family. She told him she had spent her life in this garden. Giovanni felt as if he were talking to a tiny child. Her spirit sparkles like clear water. They walked slowly through the garden as they talked. Finally, they arrived at a stunning plant adorned with large purple flowers. He realized that the perfume from those flowers was like the perfume of Beatrice's breath, but much stronger. The young man reached out to break off one of the purple flowers, but Beatrice gave a scream that pierced his heart deeply. She caught his hand and pulled it away from the plant with all her strength. "Don't ever touch those flowers," she cried. "They will take your life." She fled into the house with a look of fear on her face. Then Giovanni saw Dr. Rappaccini standing in the garden. That night, Giovanni could not stop thinking about how sweet and beautiful Beatrice was. Finally, he fell asleep. But when the morning came, he woke up in severe pain. He felt as if one of his hands was on fire. It was the hand that Beatrice had grasped when he reached for one of the purple flowers. Giovanni looked down at his hand. There was a purple mark on it that looked like 4 small fingers and a little thumb. But because his heart was full of Beatrice, Giovanni forgot about the pain in his hand. He began to meet her in the garden every day. At last, she told him that she loved him, but she would never let him kiss her or even hold her hand. One morning, several weeks later, Professor Bione visited Giovanni. "I was worried about you," the older man said. "More than a month has passed since you attended university classes. Is something wrong?" Giovanni was not pleased to see his old friend. "Although there is nothing wrong, I am fine." Thank you. He wanted Professor Bione to leave, but the old man took off his hat and sat down. "My dear Giovanni," he said, "you will stay away from Rappaccini and his daughter. Her father has poisoned her since she was a baby. The poison is in her blood and on her breath. If Rappaccini did this to his daughter, what will he do to you?" Giovanni covered his face with his hands. "Oh my God," he cried. "Don't worry," the old man continued. "It is not too late to save you, and we may succeed in helping Beatrice too. Do you see this little silver bottle? It holds a medicine that will destroy even the most powerful poison. Give it to Beatrice to drink." Professor Bione put the little bottle on the table and left Giovanni's room. The young man wanted to believe that Beatrice was a sweet and innocent girl. However, Professor Bione's words had instilled doubts in his mind. It was nearly time for his daily meeting with Beatrice. As Giovanni combed his hair, he looked at himself in a mirror near his bed. He could not help noticing how handsome he was. His eyes looked particularly bright, and his face had a healthy, warm glow. "At least her poison has not yet infiltrated my body," he thought to himself. As he spoke, he happened to look at some flowers he had just bought that morning. A shock of horror went through his body. The flowers were turning brown. Giovanni's face became very white as he stared at himself in the mirror. Then he noticed a spider crawling near his window. He bent over the insect and blew a breath of air at it. The spider trembled and fell dead. "I am cursed," Giovanni whispered to himself. "My own breath is poisoned." At that moment, a rich, sweet voice came floating up from the garden. "Giovanni, you are late. Come down." "You are a monster," Giovanni shouted as soon as he reached her. "And with your poison, you have made me into a monster too. I am a prisoner of this garden." "Giovanni!" Beatrice cried, looking at him with her large, bright eyes. "Why are you uttering such harsh words?" "It is true that I can never leave this garden, but you are free to go wherever you wish." Giovanni looked at her with hate in his eyes. "Don't pretend that you don't know what you've done to me." The group of insects had flown into the garden. They came towards Giovanni and flew around his head. He blew his breath at them. The insects fell to the ground, dead. Beatrice cried out, "I see it! I see it!" This is the result of my father's scientific research. Believe me, Giovanni, I did not ask him to do this to you. I only wanted to love you. Giovanni's anger changed to sadness. Then he remembered the medicine that Professor Barione had given him. Perhaps the medicine will destroy the poison in their bodies and help them become normal again. "Dear Beatrice," he said, "all fate is not so terrible." He displayed the small silver bottle to her and explained the potential effects of the medicine inside. "I will drink first," she said. "He was waiting to see what happens to me before you drink it." She put Barione's medicine on her lips and took a small sip. At the same moment, Robert Cheney came out of his house and walked slowly toward the two young people. It looked like he was blessing them with his hands. "My daughter," he said, "you are no longer alone in the world. Give Giovanni one of the purple flowers from your favorite plant. It will not hurt him now. My science and your love have set him apart from ordinary men." My father, Beatrice, said weakly, "Why did you do this terrible thing to your own child?" Robert Cheney looked surprised. "What do you mean, my daughter?" he asked. "You possess a power that no other woman possesses. You can defeat your strongest enemy with only a breath. Would you rather be a weak woman? I desire love, not fear." Beatrice replied, "Now, it doesn't matter. I'm leaving you, father. I'm going with the poison you have given me, which will do no harm. Goodbye to you, Giovanni." Beatrice dropped to the ground. She died at the feet of her father and Giovanni. The poison had been too much for the young woman. The medicine that neutralized the poison also caused her to be destroyed.